think we're okay. Okay, it's on, right? You can hear me? All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome on this rainy summer August day. It is August, oh my gosh, isn't it? Okay, anyway, we're going to kick it off now, and I am Leslie Blicker from the Minnesota State System.
I'm Jeff Plowman from the Minnesota Department of Education.
And I'm Mary Jetter from the University of Minnesota, and we are the three co-chairs for the Minnesota eLearning Summit, so welcome again.
You know, welcome, except we changed the date. Welcome to the 2018 Minnesota eLearning Summit. We want to extend a warm, I'm going to take these off, there we go. We want to extend a warm welcome to everybody on behalf of the Minnesota Learning Commons. For how many of you is this your first conference? Real quickly go. Oh, wow. Well, great. Oh, yeah, great. We hope you really enjoy it. And if you're not aware what the Minnesota Learning Commons is, it's a pretty unique joint powers agreement that brings together the major public education systems in the state. So it's the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Education with the K-12 system, and then the Minnesota State System. And just out of curiosity, how many here are higher ed? Can we see? Great. And how many are K-12? Yeah, and I want to say congratulations for coming, because we know, in the summer it's often difficult to give up those precious vacation days, so welcome. One last thing about it, the Learning Commons is really all geared around online learning and digital education.
And so in addition to the summit, some of the things that we do is we work together to produce free online webinars focused on online blended and digital education. We share resources on areas of common interest and provide joint licensing for services such as the Quality Matters online and blended course rubrics.
So I have a few quick but important announcements for everybody before we introduce our speaker. Most of these can be found on the sheet, Get the Most Out of the Summit. So first, the electronic guidebook. How many of you have downloaded that? Yay, great job. Please make sure you have downloaded it. If you haven't, please do so. This is where you'll find all of the up-to-date information about sessions. You'll find extended session descriptions, last-minute additions, and cancellations. On page 2 of the guide, you'll find instructions for how to download it if you haven't done so already. Second, presenters. If you've not done so already, please upload your presentation materials before your session or as soon afterwards as you can. Directions are available in the program, or ask someone at the registration desk. Conference attendees will be able to access these materials via the Summit website or through the guidebook app. I know I go back and look at these over and over again throughout the year from sessions I've been to, so it's a really valuable resource for everyone. Room locations. If you look on your guide on pages 4 and 5, you'll find the building maps. The concurrent sessions will take place in this building, either upstairs or downstairs. Next, exhibit booths. We have a large number of booths up in the upper level lobby. You probably saw them when you checked in and got your breakfast. We encourage you to visit their booths and consider attending their special showcase sessions. They were chosen because of the relevance of their offerings to everyone here in attendance at the summit. And my last announcement has to do with the afternoon reception. So please attend the afternoon reception. There'll be the poster presenters and the exhibitors. It's a great opportunity to network and chat with people that you got to know during the sessions. It begins immediately following the last breakout session at 4 p.m. There will be snacks and beverages, and backed by popular demand, there will be a cash bar.
Oh, there's a question. Wait, question.
Yeah. Question?
Can I ask a quick follow-up question?
For sure.
Is the app what the guidebook is? So if we have the app, we have all the information. In addition to the app,
The same as the printed one, so it is the official one. There's nothing additional.
but do I have that and downloading the app?
Then you have to download the guidebook.
So when you download the app, you have to look for this particular conference in the guidebook app.
Wait, Okay, somebody else help me out here, but I wasn't able to put in a search term for it. There was, what do you call it, the indicia, there was an email sent to everybody who had registered.
Oh,
with the
QR code.
The QR code image, and you point your phone at it, and then in the guidebook, it immediately finds the conference, and then it downloads.
So, I just have a few more announcements. Internet access. For those of you who have access to the EduRoam server, that might be the U of M faculty and staff who are with us today, you should select that network and enter your username and password. Otherwise, for the rest of us, we'll use the guest UMN network. There's no password, but you should get a pop-up prompting you to accept the terms of use, and instructions are provided also in your program for internet access. This year, again, we're going to offer special interest group roundtables. The special interest groups are an important initiative of the MNLC, where we bring together people from the 3 systems and others to focus on particular topics. This year, we're running special interest group roundtables on digital literacy, innovation, and open educational resources. So if you come to these sessions, expect them to be participatory, so the people who are in the SIG will talk about their activity, but also elicit interest from the group. There's a Twitter channel for the conference, and I think Bryan has already found it, because I found him on it last night. It is hashtag MN Summit 2018. So please tweet early and often. The awards, again, will be held for the Minnesota eLearning Excellence Awards, and those are happening during tomorrow's, or immediately following tomorrow's keynote by Goldie Blumensteak, and between lunch. So the awards ceremony will begin at 12:15. And lastly, digital badges. The U of M College of Continuing and Professional Studies is offering digital badges to participants of the 2018 Minnesota eLearning Summit. A digital badge serves as a verification for employers and peers that you have participated in this professional development conference. Visit the conference webpage for more information on how to claim your badge.
I'm bringing up the rear with just a few more announcements. There's a session description in your program that was incorrect for 3 o'clock this afternoon. I don't know if you want to go to your booklets. It's called Exploring Student to Content Interaction in Online Courses. And it features Bilal Dama and Bob Billick, or Robert Billick. The new description will be posted outside, I think, somewhere, but here it is very quickly, so cross that one out. Metropolitan State University Center for Online Learning assists faculty with making their courses highly interactive. The most recent collaboration has been on a course focused on credit for prior learning developed for the Minnesota State system. So come explore this course and other courses, which include interactive case studies, animated stories, and more. I'm not going to finish, there's just a short sentence left. So please make a note of that, and then look for the updated, I don't know where Katie said she's going to post it, probably. Someone's waving. Okay, anyway, it'll be posted somewhere. Sorry. Outside the door of the session itself. That's what I figured. Okay, very good. Thanks, Bob. And finally, okay, a few quick thank yous. This is our thank you moment for the entire conference, I suppose. Our great appreciation to the members of our Summit Program Committee who began their work about a year ago putting the outstanding program together. So if you would, for a moment, stand up or make your presence known, we'd like to make sure we give you a big thank you, everyone on the committee. All right, they must be shy. There we go. Another big thank you to the U of M College, College of Continuing and Professional Studies, who did a great job managing the summit, and to the University of Minnesota, who is serving as our host site this year. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Bob Stein, Interim Dean, College of Continuing and Professional Studies, University of Minnesota.
don't have to do the dance up here with two other people, so this is sort of nice. Hi, Sal. Good to see you. My name is Bob Stein. I'm the interim dean. Someone asked me for how long. I said about a month. Our dean recently retired. I've been in the college as a senior associate dean for academic programs for 11 years, so this is not all unfamiliar territory to me. And many of you may be wondering about the name. You might remember us as CCE, the College of Continuing Education. We changed our name last fall to, I think, better represent the audiences we serve both on the credit side and the non-credit side of what we do. So on behalf of the college and the university, let me add my welcome to all of you to the Minnesota eLearning Summit. CCAPS, I have you all say CCAPS, so you stop saying CCE so quickly. CCAPS. All right, that's our college acronym. CCAPS has a long history of distance education, working our way over the years through correspondence courses, and then classes on radio, and then classes on TV, and eventually to online learning like the rest of you, which we've been doing for the past couple decades. And in addition to our own history in e-learning, it's a pleasure for our conference center, which you're in now, and our conference services unit to host all of you here on the St. Paul campus. Someone also asked me to remind you, the main campus of the University of Minnesota, the largest one anyhow. So online education, you all know this, growing in importance, continues to do so in both K through 12 education and higher education. That's why you're all here. You know this stuff, but as a reminder, in many instances, it's a matter of convenience for students and instructors. In some cases, it's a better way to learn. The speeds are getting faster where speeds are available. The tools seem to me to be getting better, and our understanding of pedagogy in the online environment is also improving. I think we just witnessed one of the issues perhaps with online education is how you use the technology. It's like, okay, how do I download the app? Where do I find the particular thing? So I think there are still cases, as good as it is, technology can be a barrier for folks. But with all that, ironically, and I'd ask you to keep this in mind, here we all are meeting face to face. A little bit ironic. We could probably have arranged for every one of the presentations today to be delivered through a virtual meeting platform, but we didn't do that. And I haven't done that in all the years of this summit, and made me ponder just a little bit, why is that? So here's my thoughts, and you may have some others. Perhaps we like being in physical proximity with our peers or other people that we are learning with. We probably want to build our human networks while we're here. And with how we schedule conferences, we sort of can mix and match that over the couple days that you are here, different groups of people at different times. It's possible that being here, the environment is more conducive to learning instead of sitting in front of a monitor. Or we may simply need a break from our ordinary routine. So I'd ask you to keep all those things in mind as you ponder about online learning and where its future leads. These all feel like challenges to me around online education and things that we need to continue to address. I am glad you're all here to help figure those things out. So again, welcome to the University of Minnesota, to the St. Paul campus, the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, and the eLearning Summit. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tim Anderson, who's the System Director for Student Success Technologies at Minnesota State. Tim.
Good morning, everyone. It's an introduction to do an introduction. So we want to welcome Dr. Bryan Alexander. Dr. Bryan Alexander is an internationally known futurist, researcher, writer, speaker, consultant, and teacher. How's that, huh? Working on how technology transforms our education. Bryan speaks widely and publishes frequently, with articles appearing in venues including the Atlantic Monthly, the Insider Higher Ed. He has been interviewed and featured in MSNBC, U.S. News and World Report, National Public Radio, The Chronicle of Higher Education, and others. Dr. Alexander has a PhD from the University of Michigan, completing his dissertations on doppelgangers in Romantic era fiction and poetry. He is, now how's that for a mouthful, huh? I had to look up doppelgangers, sorry. Bryan has worked in the National Institute of Technology in library education, where he has helped small colleges and universities best integrate digital technologies. In 2013, Dr. Alexander launched the Bryan Alexander Consulting, LLC, and through this, he consults throughout higher education in the United States and abroad. We are excited and curious for Dr. Alexander's presentation, Higher Education and Weirder Technology in the 2020s.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the introduction. You brought up my Michigan past, so that's good. I can talk about U of M. I have to say which U of M. It's wonderful to be here for all kinds of reasons. I haven't been to Minneapolis, St. Paul area for about a year, and it's good to be here. I'm glad that you provided such wonderful weather for me. How many of you are on Twitter right now? Excellent. A room full of nerds. Fantastic. Please keep tweeting. I'm going to be busy for the next 45 minutes. I won't be able to tweet back at you right away, but I will try and catch up afterwards. This is a great way for having a back-channel conversation. So what we're going to be speaking about today, I'd like you to think about the future, and I'd like you to think about the next decade, maybe a little bit further. So I want you to imagine where we could be between now and 2029. So perhaps that will be the first presidential term for Chelsea Clinton. Perhaps it'll be the second for Ocasio-Cortez. But I want you to think about where this could go. I want you to think about where education and technology could take us. And in order to take you that way, I'm going to draw on some work that I and others have been doing for the past decade. I run something called the Future of Education Observatory, where we take a look at major trends and forces reshaping education and technology. We do this through all kinds of ways. If you're curious, just go to futureofeducation.us. We maintain a database of about 86 trends that we've been tracking very closely. And we break these trends down by education, by educational context, by technology. And our idea here is that you can look at trends in the present, things that you can see, observe, test, and document, and then see what happens if you extrapolate them forward into the future. So for the next few minutes, we're going to do this. We're going to start off with the trends that don't involve technology. We're going to talk about the trends that involve the social forces that press on education as we go. And let's start big. Let's start with the big picture of all. Let's think about the planet. And if you want to think about this, one way of thinking about it is that higher education in the US in particular is now part of a global higher education market, where we have flows of students, faculty, ideas, and research across national boundaries. And up until last year, in the US, we saw greater and greater numbers of international students coming to our undergrad and graduate programs. Last year, that went backwards for the first time in our history. And we don't know how much further that's going to decline over the next year. If you're thinking about the future, one of the good big picture ways of doing so is by looking at demographics. Because when we look at a population, we have a lot of data about how they're likely to live, where they're likely to be, and we can analyze that pretty closely. And a couple of huge aspects of this I want to make sure that you're aware of. One of them is we're aging in some really interesting and powerful ways. In the United States, we are producing fewer kids, and we're producing more seniors. Let me explain. This chart is representation of all of human history until the 1950s. This looks at the demographics of a given society. All these horizontal slices are age groups. The bottommost is kids, and then each successive slice is older and older, all the way up through people aged 100 or so. And you can see that the way human history looks is, in the great words of Neil Stephenson, we spam the environment with babies, and then mortality sets in. And you can see that over time we have fewer and fewer people until we have a very small group of very precious elders. And this is what the developing world looks like right now. This is Nigeria. This is what the developed world looks like now. This is Japan, and this is Germany. That pyramid is flipped upside down, and for fantastic reasons. This is a portrait of tremendous human success. In our lifetimes, we've experienced this. Thanks to increasing education for women, thanks to increasing access to birth control, thanks to increasing medical technology and awareness, thanks to increasing public health, we can live longer than ever before. We are healthier than ever before. This is an extraordinary achievement. And we haven't fully grappled with what it means for our societies yet. For example, let's take a look at a century of America. In 1960, we looked, yeah, it's kind of a classic pyramid in some ways. And you think about us as the young society, a society devoted to youth. And here's where we're headed. Not a pyramid, but a rectangle. We haven't really planned this out. We haven't really thought this through yet. But this has impacts for everything. For example, who here is in primary and secondary school? Right? So you know what happens to your population as that population begins to dwindle. Let me give you a graphic representation of that. This is work from a wonderful economist at Carleton College. If I can mention Carleton here, I hope it's okay. Taking a look at birth rates across the United States. And what this looks at is 18-year-olds. And you can see that the colors, the states that are colored red or orange or that kind of tan color are ones that are producing fewer and fewer 18-year-olds. And one of those regions is called the Northeast. The other region is called the Midwest. Not coincidentally, those are the locations of more higher education institutions than anywhere else in the United States. Now, Minnesota, you see, is a bright yellow, and that means you're plateauing, roughly. And you can see signs of that plateau from your largest age groups, which are middle-aged. So, 25 to 54 years, that's about half of Minnesota right now. Similar patterns across the middle. Yeah, please.
Can I just ask, what are his assumptions about immigration?
Oh, fantastic question, fantastic question. My current assumption right now is that immigration is going to be roughly a plateau. And this is based, of course, on a whole series of wild cards, including most notably not just the White House, but also if you look at the way people around the world perceive American education, Parkland and school shootings play a high visible role. So there's often a sense that the United States is a dangerous place to move to. And that plays a key role as well. And the other thing is, if you take a look at Mexico as well as big chunks of Latin America in general, their population demographics are changing. Although they are a largely majority Catholic country and traditionally had roughly 5 to 8 kids per couple, now that replacement level is dropping. Mexico, the level is about 2.3. So they're producing fewer kids, which is going to reduce the amount of immigration. That's a fantastic question, and it's one that matters a lot for policy. I'm going to come back to that in a little while too, but thank you for asking. Where are you from?
Metropolitan State.
Excellent. Hi. Now, we're talking about birth, but tell me your name again, I'm sorry.
Julie.
Julie mentions migration, and if I can, inside the U.S., our patterns of migration haven't changed at all. We don't talk about them very much, but they do reflect a lot about how we live. And obviously the patterns that you've all lived with of people leaving the snow belt and moving elsewhere continues to grow. The big two states for this are Arizona and Texas, which are massive success stories demographically. Now we can shift from demographics to economics for a minute. And I want to draw your attention to something huge that happened. Let me just go back for a sec. This change in the United States, 1960 is the beginning of a decade where we overhauled higher education in the US. That's when we massively expanded community colleges. That's where we had a huge flood of students into higher education. That's where we turned a bunch of normal colleges into baccalaureates. That's when a lot of baccalaureates decided to become universities. Something else happened in that period. In the 1960s, that's the center of a period where we were the least economically unequal in our entire history. From around 1914 to 1950, the inequality levels of the United States and several other countries dropped. And they dropped for reasons you can guess. World War I, World War II, the Great Depression destroyed a lot of wealth. And then we had a lot of redistributive policies, like the New Deal. So from around 1950 to about 1980, we were the least unequal we had ever been. And we don't recognize this. We don't appreciate what this means. In that period, again, this is where we redesigned the education system we now have. Federal financial aid, for example, right? And starting about 1980, the engines of inequality kicked off again, and inequality has risen and continues to rise, and nothing is slowing it down. We could talk about which engines do the most. Is it technology? Is it globalization? Is it the shift to financial industries? The key point here is our inequality levels are now roughly that of 1910. A few months ago, a Swiss bank published an article called The New Gilded Age. They meant that very, very precisely. They're thinking of the 1890s is where we're headed. So think about this gap of our school system here, now in a different era. Let's drill down a little economics a little bit further still, but we'll get to technology, I promise. One of the big transformations that happened over the past generation is a shift from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. Now, the US still manufactures stuff. We just don't employ a lot of people doing it. We also have the change from the pattern of having one job for one career for life, headed towards a gig economy, or what Australians call the American economy. That is, you have multiple jobs, multiple careers, sometimes overlapping and simultaneously. This is, by the way, the core of lifelong learning, if you think about it. We also have a declining participation in the workforce. That is, the number of adults who can work, who choose not to, has been increasing. We also have income stagnation. That is, American compensation for most wages is still at 1980 levels. You can see signs of this in academic labor. And this is an amazing, amazing graph done by an adjunct support group, where they took a look at where higher education has been hiring for the past generation. And you can see the big spike is non-faculty professionals, what we overall call administration. You think everything from IT to library to custodians to deans, that's been growing massively. Tenure track faculty has barely grown at all. We've switched our overall professoriate from majority tenure track to majority adjunct. That happened in the past 20 years. One of the most important signal changes in American higher education history. There are other changes at work too. I don't think I need to tell you that we're experiencing huge tensions, political tensions in the US, across race, across gender, across class. We have anxieties about nationalism and ethnicity. And all of these obviously press on higher education in all kinds of ways. And a lot of those anxieties come from our changing population. Think about the students that we have now. Still, if you listen to a lot of discourse about higher education in the US, the typical student is supposed to be an 18-year-old who comes from a great academic family, who goes to a 4-year residential college, after which they graduate and become a devoted alumni supporter for their alma mater. And that person is still there. They're a niche, they're a minority. But we still treat them in many ways as kind of the normative experience. But our student body has changed in ways that we really haven't grappled with either. I mean, one is that we have the non-traditional student, the adult learner, which is, depending on your metrics, 40 to 35% of the undergraduate population. Soon that will no longer be non-traditional. That will simply be traditional. We have increasing numbers of first-generation college students, which is one of the reasons we've been growing so many staff to help support them. We also have veterans. And one of the weird things about our experience in the 21st century is that America is now still fighting the longest war we have ever fought in our history, and we almost never talk about it. It's not in the news, it barely plays a role in our politics, and we generate, among other things, an awful lot of veterans. And the majority of American colleges and universities don't talk about them. Veterans, on the other hand, are really good at organizing. And they have a whole, basically, subgroup of colleges and universities they apply to. Some colleges and universities are really good about supporting veterans. Generally, we have a lot more work to do. And on top of that, we have this boom in learning disabilities, which isn't fully understood. Everything from ADHD to various kinds of disability. So we have to grapple with all of these, which means we have to change how we teach and learn, which means we have to change how we support it and how we fund it. Student population is also reflecting the United States demographics in terms of race, where the proportion of Americans that are white is decreasing, the proportion that are people of color is increasing, especially the Hispanic population. This is less visible in Minnesota and less visible in my state of Vermont, but nationally this is a pretty well-established trend. Now, if we zoom in to what happens in education as a result, there's some interesting details about this. And one is that around 2012, 2013, something weird happened. From about 1982 to around 2012, 2013, we grew higher education students massively. I mean, this is an epochal, historical boom. This is like the GI Bill growth, or what happened in the 19th century when we invented land-grant universities. We really piled a huge amount of students, including probably most of you in this room. And then in 2012, 2013, that stopped, and we've gone backwards. The number of students enrolled in American higher education is down 6% since that year. And it went down every semester, tick by tick by tick. Now you can see this is really the case in for-profits, which went through a boom in the 90s and have been hemorrhaging students. But we've also seen losses in community colleges, and other sectors have barely seen any growth at all. I've called this peak higher education. I really hope I'm wrong. I've been right for 6 years. I really want to be disproven about this. But this matters enormously, especially to the extent that your institutions depend on tuition for revenue. We've changed another way of doing tuition as well over the same period, where we decided across the board, red state and blue state, big state and small, we decided that we should spend less to support public higher education. There's no dissent from this. This is a majority opinion. This has happened in every single state. My own state, Vermont, pretty blue state. You know, we tried to give you Bernie Sanders as a president. See what you did? We are 48th or 49th in the country in supporting higher education, public higher education. Our community colleges cost about $3,000 a semester. This is a real problem, and you can see this happening across the country. Now, if this is true, how do we pay for higher education? Well, the solution is one that we've all seen. And this, you may have seen a glimpse of this when GMAC started making more money than GM did making cars. We turned to finance, we turned to loans, and we turned to debt. So right now, as of today, the total amount of loans is about $1.4 trillion. Quick show of hands, how many of you are paying off student loans now? Whoa, whoa, keep those hands up. If I asked this question 20 years ago, it would have been a handful of hands. Right? We've changed how we did this. No other country has done this, by the way. So America's number one. Does this impact how we teach and learn? Obviously. This impacts how people change majors, how they pick careers. This impacts everything from tuition freezes to discount rates, all over the place. In fact, has anyone seen this show yet? There's a game show where the prize is to pay off your student loans. Real game show. And by the way, women, you pay more, you owe more in loans than men, across the board. And again, by the way, almost everybody is fine with this. There's been almost no political dissent about this, almost no pushback. This is simply how we finance higher education right now in the 21st century. See, I think of all these trends together. And I think of a lot of things, it's my job. But I come up with this phrase of crunch time, because we have these tremendous pressures being applied to higher education, and that impacts every job that is here in this room. Everything from librarians to administrators to faculty. I mean, we have to really, really spin right now. We have to grapple with these pressures. We have to change. And these pressures are hitting us in all kinds of areas. So, not technology. Let's talk about technology. And we could talk about the big picture of technology. I mean, we're living in a period with a lot of amazing things starting to happen in technology. I mean, this, for example, is a shot of a tokamak engine where they're trying to make fusion reactors on Earth. We have startup companies that are trying to produce space elevators. That is a physical cable going from the Earth's surface to orbit around the Earth. We have quantum computing. Last month, Cambridge University set up a quantum computing network around London so people could alter atoms and add information to them miles and miles apart. In biology, we've invented the most incredible engine called CRISPR, which CRISPR lets us edit genes in ways that we've never had this capacity before, which could really transform just about everything in life. If that doesn't feel powerful enough, our ability to work on the human brain and to alter the brain's content has been growing. We have more and more tools for this. And in fact, it's not just the brain. We've been altering humanity. When people say, I don't like technology, I don't want to do much with technology, it's way too late for that. We are in many ways cyborgs. And people will say, when I say that, they often say, well, yeah, you think about everything, all kinds of physical implants that we use. But also just think about how many people in the US use mind-altering drugs, as in antidepressants, every day. I mean, we're already past the point of being old-fashioned human. We're in many ways already post-human. So we have to think about things. We have choices. We've extended lifespan to a huge degree. In the US, does that mean that we'll keep doing this? We'll get used to people living past 100? The flip side is, are we going to see more movements for death with dignity or assisted suicide? What happens to people when we can hack our DNA pretty well and when we can alter the human body? Think about the cultural divides that open up as a result of this. Red state versus blue state is going to feel very 20th century. And then for you in academia, this question of what does it mean to be human? If I alter my brain chemistry, if I have replacement parts, if my genome has been hacked by my parents, am I still human? These are fantastic questions. Technology is changing. So let's assume a whole bunch of technologies now. Technologies that you're discussing, presenting on today. This program is very, very exciting. Let's just assume right now, without diving into them, that social media is happening and growing. Let's assume crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, open source software, data analytics. Let's assume mobile computing is going on, gaming, gamification, virtualization of data, digitization, digital storytelling. Let's assume always-on media capture, audio, video, text, always-on surveillance. Let's assume hacking keeps going. If all this is going on, what's next? Well, more data. We want to capture more data and use more of it. That seems to be a kind of universal drive right now. And what we do with the data is interesting. We like simulations. And the simulations are becoming more and more powerful. We don't talk about them very much, but this is where climate science is right now. We try to simulate what will happen if the temperature of the world goes up 4 degrees. We're running a big experiment, it's called Earth, but we can't do repeated experiments on it, right? We only have the one shot. So we run lots of simulations. We run simulations of populations, we run simulations of politics. In fact, there was a fantastic article last week about some simulations that were looking at how a population transitions from being majority religious to majority secular. And the scientists behind this are worried because they've identified factors that make that transition, and they're worried now that politicians will use those factors to help transition a population. Simulations matter. We have 3D printing, which is a small revolution by itself. If you want to think about it this way. Here's the 2D printer, the Xerox copier. Here's the Star Trek replicator. We're right about here right now. And we print things like houses. We print human bones. There are startups that print more human tissues, right? We can print food. If it's British, don't look at it too closely. We can print an awful lot of stuff. There's a lot of art and creativity around that, which has helped lead to the whole makerspace pedagogy. I mean, makerspaces are about a lot of things beyond 3D printers. But that's an interesting development where we go back to the idea of tinkering, the 19th century classic Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla period of rapid invention and play. And meanwhile, we love, above all media, we love video. I mean, think about it. We watch things on YouTube that we probably wish we'd never seen before. We use video conferencing that doesn't always work well or right. And we still do it. YouTube may be the world's single cultural agora right now. And we stage political protests for YouTube. And of course, most of you watch movies streaming through Apple or through Netflix or through Amazon. Video is enormous. Video is simply growing. Then there's voice. How many of you have played with either Alexa or the Google or Apple equivalent? Oh, very good. So you're used to this by now. If one of you had them here, it would be responding to me, because I would have said Alexa. In my house, the favorite app is a little app called Meow Meow. Have you seen this? It just plays beautiful recordings of cat sounds. So I'll say, Alexa, meow meow. And you hear, meow. And my cats, we walk in and they'll freeze. What was that? But then, because they're cats, they'll say, oh, I didn't notice anything. It's cool. And just keep moving on. Well, there's a lot we can do with voice-activated technology. It really is pretty uncanny at this point. I mean, think about this for the learning management system. If you're a student, Alexa, when is my biology quiz this week? If you're a faculty member, think, all right, when is my biology quiz this week, right? Now, we have as well the revolution around virtual reality, around augmented reality, which we can combine to form to mixed reality, and this is churning away really, really rapidly. And you want to think about a few things of this. One is it's still early days, the technology is still very basic. You also want to think about what a revolution this is. So if you wear a good mixed reality headset, I can walk around this room, I can say take my copy of Outlook and paste it to that wall. I can take a beautiful photo of a beach and put it on that wall there so I could look at it in wintertime and dream. I can have Pandora playing from the ceiling, and then I can on that wall over there have a browser. At no point do I actually use a window or a keyboard or a mouse. Potentially the biggest development in computing since the 1960s. And there are other examples of this too. This is one of my favorite, oh, sorry, there's a copy of this. This is a mad scientist at Worcester Polytech near Boston. He has this great project with HoloLens. Has anybody here used HoloLens yet? Okay, you should. There's a problem with this, by the way. The company in the world doing the most advances with virtual reality is Microsoft. And they're doing great work, and they're very, very impressive. The problem is it's Microsoft, so no one will talk about them. But what Dmitry Korkin has is this visualization of a protein molecule. And what he can do now is put the lenses over his eyes, and the protein molecule hovers in space in front of him. And he can walk around his office, and the protein molecule will follow him, and he can stop it, he can spin it around, turn it upside down, change the visualization, zoom in, zoom out, and all this by voice and by gesture. That's already working right now. His new project is working with this little thing called the human brain. Meanwhile, the technology gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I mean, you think about your phone. And we're all used to the phone right now. It's kind of old hat. But you think, one way of thinking about this is my little Android phone, which is kind of beaten up, has more computing power than the entire Apollo program did in the 60s and 70s. Okay, that's impressive. But we still make these devices smaller and smaller. In fact, the amount of computing in this phone is actually pretty small. Most of this is battery. Right? So what happens when we start making computing that's too small for us to see, that becomes semi-visible? This, for example, is the size of a grain of rice. We may head to the Internet of Things in a big way. So you want to think about when you can have networked sensors doing network stuff all over your physical environment. So yeah, having your car update you on Twitter with tire pressure, being able to check a carton of eggs in your fridge by the pressure sensor in every little cup so you can see if the egg has gone bad or not. Being able to monitor your pets, being able to monitor your students, being able to look at your textbook, having your textbook look at you. We're just figuring out what the Internet of Things is right now. It's a security nightmare in a lot of ways. People say it's a privacy nightmare because we don't take privacy very seriously right now, but all of this is happening very quickly. And a question for you is to think about, what does a campus look like? Imagine a junior high or middle school. Think about a university, when you can walk across campuses. And perhaps your walking spaces have sensors on them so we can track how many people are walking on something to rearrange the space. Perhaps there are sensors in the trees monitoring where students are for their safety. We're just beginning to think about this. Now, in case you're not nervous, in case you're not concerned yet, let me introduce you to Cathy O'Neil, the author of the best titled book in the 21st century. Actually, it's my second favorite title. There's a great book about the Soviet space program called The Red Rocket's Glare. Pretty close. But Weapons of Mass Destruction is a pretty amazing book. By the way, if you're a humanist like me, this is really beautiful writing about math, so you don't have to be too afraid. She argues that with our contemporary use of data and AI, that we are recapitulating, if not enhancing, pre-existing prejudices of all kinds. Her main focus is on poverty as well as race, and we find way too many cases where presumably neutral data and data analytics looks pretty racist or pretty classist. So there's questions. I mean, how do we handle this? How do we avoid those problems? How do we rethink property and privacy? What happens, speaking of property, to your data when you walk through a campus? Who owns the data about you? An 18 or a 30-year-old who starts taking classes with you, who owns their data of their reading, of their test taking, of their conversation in class? Moreover, we need to think about safety trade-offs. How much are we willing to compromise our privacy? For example, 2 years ago, a mental health clinic did this fantastic project where they had a limited social media presence for their patients. And they were able to run data analytics over the patients, all their output for visuals, for pictures, for texts. And they were able to link that to the patient's likelihood to self-harm or attempt suicide. And they had a pretty good degree of confidence. That is, they could look at a student's, say, Twitter output and figure out with about 90% certainty if they're going to kill themselves. Imagine doing that on your campus. Imagine a parent of an 18-year-old saying, you better do that. Do we give up that degree of privacy? This is a question that we have to hash out, that we have to hash out now. Now, some of you are working in open education, which is tremendous. This is a great thing. I just want you to think ahead a little bit, next, say, 5 to 10 years about open. So open education resources continue to grow. Even the Trump administration funds them, which I kind of thank myself for every day that they do that. OER continues to grow. Imagine 5 years from now if McGraw-Hill goes out of business because the majority of education resources are open. What happens then? How does that change things? And if you ask students, this isn't really controversial for them. Like, not have to pay a $500 textbook? Cool, I'm there. I mean, have you heard about Z degrees, for example? Right? So a program that costs $0, Z, for materials. And we also have the ability to make things together. So students can work with faculty to make new resources. Faculty can work with other faculty. We have open teaching as a result. In fact, we have co-creation of resources. I mean, there's a whole pedagogy that flows from open education. And meanwhile, we have the nerdiest battle on earth right now, which is the battle for open access and scholarly publication. I mean, we have, in many ways, the entire ecosystem of scholarly publication is driven by a handful of companies that are making themselves incredibly wealthy right now. There's a battle over this. Should this continue or not? In full disclosure, I'm the advisor for a documentary that's coming out next month about this. But this is a huge deal. Is it possible that in 5 or 10 years, we'll see companies like Wiley and Elsevier go out of business because the majority of scholarly publishing is open access for everybody? That's a huge battle happening now. Now, not a battle, but a dream is the idea of what happens to your learning management systems. Right now, if you take a look at Blackboard, if you take a look at Sakai, if you look at Moodle, in many ways this is a mature market. They're doing more or less the same thing. What if we blow that up? What if we start from new assumptions? What if we make these tools actually social rather than asocial? What if we integrate open education into them? What if you take an LMS and disintegrate it into different parts so they can work with other tools and services? Some call this the next generation digital learning environment. This is a whole dream right now that people are thinking of for the far future, say for 2 years from now. I don't have time to talk about Bitcoin right now, but I do want to mention blockchain for a couple of reasons. One is I've managed to blank the screen. That was pretty cool. Is that my blank slide? You saw that? That was pretty good. It's like Steve Jobs is punishing me for using PowerPoint still. So there's one major use of blockchain for education right now, which is certification of degrees. And the idea that you can store a degree not in a registrar's office, but in the blockchain so that it's more durable, more accessible in all kinds of ways. That's starting to happen. Beyond that, we can also use the blockchain to store content in some ways. So there's a quiet push to have the blockchain be kind of parallel to the World Wide Web. Okay, this is all technology that you know about. This is all pretty basic. Let's get a little weirder still. We have to talk about automation and think hard about this. Here's a quote that I think of once a week. This is from the guy who's in charge of the company that owns Google, so I like to pay attention to him. He says, in the long run, I think we'll evolve in computing from mobile first to an AI first world. So think about that, what's implicit in that. When we talk about mobile, if you're using this device, you're in the majority of users of the World Wide Web. You're obviously the majority of people using mobile apps. If you're using a laptop or a desktop, you're in a shrinking minority of users, which is why web design looks different today, where you have, instead of multiple columns, you have one big picture because you're likely to be seeing it on this or on a tablet. Okay, we're moving to a mobile-first world. We're in many ways there, not in education. We're still catching up on that. But what if we made the world AI first? Imagine what your email looks like if we design it with AI as central. Imagine your library software. Imagine your LMS. Why are we thinking about this? Well, we've made a whole series of breakthroughs, crazy breakthroughs in artificial intelligence. I mean, beating humans at chess was one thing, beating them at Go was another thing, and now we have computers beating each other at Go and evolving strategies to defeat each other. It's pretty extraordinary. We're doing this with robotics as well. I love using this image because it's a drone with a shotgun, a drone with a chainsaw. Why? It's a drone with a chainsaw. You don't need any other reason for this. But we're using robotics in all kinds of ways. Here in the Midwest, of course, we've been using robots to make all kinds of stuff for a long time. The Midwest remains the center of American manufacturing of robots, but we're using robots for self-driving cars, for self-driving trucks. We're using them at war and in police in all kinds of ways. In fact, what we're seeing is automation taking up more and more human functions, which is pretty interesting and pretty challenging. I mean, for example, if you don't want to do anything with technology, your economy has already changed because we have software trading money with software that shapes our entire global economy. This is a big chunk of the finance sector right now. It's pretty astonishing to look at. Humans feel kind of secondary. Have you heard the joke about the last factory with a human worker? It has 2 employees, a man and a dog, and the dog is there to keep the man from touching the machines. So we have automation doing more, but we think humans, we have creativity. We can make art, we can make jokes, we're creative. Artificial intelligence has been taught to be creative already. This is a film that was shot in many ways and created almost entirely by AI. So you might stop and say, this is ridiculous. We won't do this kind of thing. We don't like automation because humans, we want contact with people. We love this, right? That's not true. About 1/3 of us are introverts who have too much human contact. I'm an extrovert. We built the world to torture introverts, right? That's how we design things. My wife's an extreme introvert. She calls me her seeing eye human. She kind of pushes me out to deal with humans. I'm happy, I'm extrovert, I'll talk about it, right? But introverts have too much contact with humans in many ways. And besides, there are plenty of things that you don't want human contact with. When I pay taxes, I don't necessarily want extra human contact, right? There are a lot of ways this can really happen. Some say automation's too expensive. Well, the idea is like with any technology, it gets cheaper and cheaper over time. And then this especially, people are afraid of technology. I mean, self-driving car, programmed badly, killed someone, people freaked out. I have no sympathy for this. We kill 30,000 people a year. We know this, we do it all the time with cars. Humans are terrible drivers. And we reward us, we give us more and more cars to kill each other with. We're fantastic at that. Auto insurance companies are pushing self-driving cars because the software, even at its worst, is better than we are. That's a little awkward to think about, especially in a country that loves cars so much. I used to live in the Detroit area. I know what this is like. We still have to worry about this. We have a lot of anxieties about technology. Now, where could this go? How far could this take us? There's a lot of research into this, which is pretty interesting. This is a book by Peter Frey's called Four Futures, where he imagines some different ways automation could play out, and I want to draw a little bit on that. One is the historical pattern of automation or technology. We invent something new, it puts some people out of work, but it grows a bigger industry. Historically, did Minnesota ever ship ice to the South? Was that an industry here? Yeah? Okay, because that was a big deal in the Northeast, I know. Well, we invented refrigeration. And that was bad news for the ice industry. But we grew a huge industry. We're overall better off. Right? Automation beat horse and buggy. Too bad for horse and buggy, but cars were a lot bigger and did a lot more stuff. Fine. So with automation, well, we'll get rid of taxi drivers. We'll get rid of truck drivers. We'll get rid of stock traders. Okay, maybe we'll grow more businesses. We'll grow more ideas, more professions. My favorite one to think about is AI ethicist. Right? On the other hand, this hasn't happened yet. Ever since 1990 or so, every new digital technology has employed fewer and fewer people. So this is why some people are really nervous about automation. It may be that we're facing a decade of underemployment or unemployment, which makes you think, what are you preparing your students for? What curriculum do you have? And by you, I mean elementary school through grad school. Now, it could be that if income inequality continues to accelerate, automation will speed that up. Or it could be that we'll become friends. I mean, there are a lot of ways that we already use technology intimately. I already mentioned that most of you are cyborgs. We've already got that. But think about how much data we use in our work. So to be a professor, to have so much data about your students historically, to be able to influence them and shape them, that might be awesome. How many professions are hip deep in automation right now? It may be this is the future we look at. I want to leave you with a positive idea. Then I want to tell you what to do. Positive idea is if you look at the Italian Renaissance, It was a terrible time to be alive. It's great for us. Fantastic invention that we get to look at. Fantastic art. A lot of creative bursts aren't necessarily a happy place to live through. But we're experiencing this now. Ever since the web took off, we have lived through a renaissance in human creativity, of people having access to storytelling tools, everything from writing to film to audio. We've lived through that and experienced that immensely. When, I won't call you Dean Stein, is it Provost or Dean? When Dean Stein was talking about the growth of online learning, think about how that just happened in this past generation, where we're nearly at par, the amount of students online and the students taking face-to-face classes. This is a huge boom of creativity that we're still working through right now. So think about that. That's interesting. That's positive. I mean, we may see an expansion of our powers. I mean, people say, 70 is the new 60, right? We're living longer and doing more stuff. This is tremendous. We should be proud of this. The kind of problems we have now with a lot of demographics and with a lot of economics are the problems of success. That's tremendous. When I mentioned before that we're having fewer and fewer children, what a liberation, especially for women. What a fantastic progress. Yeah, it's fraught with all kinds of disasters and changes, all kinds of problems. That's what educators are about, helping teach people to better handle these problems. We might say, stop. We might say, okay, Alexander, this is enough. You've gone too far. You're into the red zone now. We can't possibly do this. The screenshot here is from a book. It's a terrible book. Please don't read it. It's a reference to a great book, which is Frank Herbert's Dune. By the way, if you ever feel stymied in your writing, if you ever feel depressed, please know that when Frank Herbert took 10 years to write Dune, he shopped it to publishers. A dozen turned him down flat. The one who picked him up was Chilton, a car manual manufacturer. So Herbert was like, I'm getting out the door, I'll make a few dollars, who cares? Now considered one of the great American novels of the 20th century. So if you ever feel bad, think of Frank Herbert and be inspired. In Dune, there's this idea that humans freak out at artificial intelligence. And we say, we'll never do that. They call it the Butlerian Jihad. Why? Read the book. It's an awesome book. But the idea is that we will stop. And we could. I mean, artificial intelligence scares the hell out of us. It's creepy in all kinds of ways. I mean, just for example, 2 nights ago, I got this wonderful recommendation from Amazon, which said you should read this book. It's a book about scary stuff in Britain. That's pretty cool. Added to that was an ad which said, tell Alexa to turn out the lights in your bedroom. That's a little chilling. And above that was, this is based on your interests. I thought, what do you know about me? This is a little upsetting. We could stop. And there are other things that could stop us too. I mean, we're not exactly in a time celebrating education or intellect. I mean, think about, for example, the rebirth of diseases thanks to the stupid anti-vax movement. Think about the wonderful followers of Gwyneth Paltrow who are buying God knows what from Goop, right? Or the followers of Alex Jones buying God knows what from him. I mean, science, we had marches for science last year because we had to, because we're in an anti-intellectual time. This doesn't bode well for new technologies. However, historically, big picture time, we invent stuff and we use it. That's what humans do. We rarely step back from inventions. This is a fascinating book about a weird historical time. In Japan, for about 2 centuries, the samurai class decided that that gunpowder, was unmanly and dishonorable. So they wouldn't use it. They stopped importing it. They wouldn't train people to use it. They went back to swords. Now, a casual glance at the early 20th century shows that that didn't quite work out. My point is, we like to use technology when we invent it. So we've got AI. The genie is way out of the bottle and making new bottles for us, whether we like it or not. So we have to deal. Now, I'm talking about new technologies. Please, please don't forget the old technologies, the ancient crufty stuff, like say, the learning management system or mobile phones, because we don't give up on the old either. This is a book by a grumpy historian, which I absolutely love, where he points out that we invent new stuff and we add them to past stuff. So if you look at the early 20th century, the time we invented the car, the truck, the airplane, we took off with a train, the biggest use of transportation, the biggest device for transportation was the horse and mule. We still use those. If you go to California, Silicon Valley is at one end, Oil extraction is happening at the other end, and you have old school agriculture, right? We add these things. We don't lose the old. So some of you will be using WordPerfect or dreaming about WordStar or using Windows 95 while somebody else is talking to their phone asking them to 3D print a new visor for their virtual reality exhibit. I think of this as imbrication, where things are layered on top of each other. My point to you today is to imagine a whole new series of layers. So, what should you do? What shouldn't you do is not think about this stuff. People don't want you to. It's scary. I don't get this stuff. Too many acronyms. Fine. Think about it. Think about it. When I present about this, I'm often told, I don't have to worry about this because I'm retiring. Stop that. Don't ever say that, because you might not retire. That's a key thing. People are retiring later and later in life for all kinds of interesting reasons, dating back to 2008 and other things as well. So you might not retire when you think you are. The other thing is, if you think about where we are, the present generations, I'm Generation X, we never mentioned Generation X, so think about boomers, think about the generation elder. They don't exactly have a great record for leaving an awesome world to people right now, right? It's the older generations that overwhelmingly voted for Trump, for example. Think about global warming. If you're an 18-year-old right now, not only did you come of age during the 2008 financial crash, how does that shape your attitude towards the economy? Not only that, if you're an 18-year-old, you know that global warming is happening, you know it's almost out of control, and you know that your elders know this and are making it worse. Think about what that means to be an 18-year-old right now. So if you're an elder right now, don't be so proud. Besides, you have a lot of power and a lot of knowledge. Don't stop thinking about this. Think about these guys. I mean, I live in a low-tech state. I mean, our idea of technology is cable TV in some ways, right? In fact, there was a company that went out of business last year that was trying to bring expanded cell phone access to 2 points in the world, Rwanda and Vermont. They went bankrupt, and they said Rwanda was easier to work in than Vermont. Here's a contest in my state. Every year, we get together high school students roughly, some middle school students, and we ask them to go to their community, find a historical building of any kind. It can be a prison, a department store, a fort, or whatever. They have to research that building. So they use primary source materials, blueprints, journals from the time, newspapers, secondary sources. They use books, they talk to historians, archivists, all this kind of thing. Then they image it using photographs and whatever else they can to create a 3D file, and they print out the result. And we have a contest. Well, all these teams come together, and all these teenagers, they cover this giant map of the state with 3D printouts of different buildings. You can feel like Godzilla, walking over this. And you talk to these kids, and they're like, yeah, we did this. We did 3D scanning, it was pretty easy. We did photogrammetry, we did the 3D printing, and we did all of this. And it was interesting thinking about building technologies in the 1920s and how they differ from 1890. These are teenagers. Some of them have gross learning disabilities, the kind that make them hard to use physical artifacts. Some of them have mental learning disabilities, which makes it challenging them to think about these processes. They work together in teams. Some of them are 13 years old. Think about those guys. That's the 2020s. That's the rest of the 21st century is for them. Think about what we're shaping for them, how we are shaping and changing the world for them. Now to do that, do what you're doing at this meeting. Collaborate across your silos. Talk to people in different professions, different disciplines, different institutions. Do this online if you have to. Use the web. It's often a shock for some people, but use the web to talk to each other. Use as much openness as you can. Talk about your projects, what you're learning, what you're discovering, what your failures are, what your hopes are. Think about everything in terms of automation's possibilities. And then a little further, this is the hard work, but the good work. Imagine a different world for education. Not this world, a different world. Think about that for your children, think about your institution, and for the generation to come. Because this is you. You're making this world. Now, 2 things happen at the end of a keynote presentation. By law, you have to show URLs, so there are those. And a nice, kind of logo. So there's a bear, just in case you haven't thought about that, right? But the other thing is, what you're not supposed to do in keynote presentations is ask for questions. You have to say, thank you very much, and head out the door. I don't do that. I'm curious to ask you instead, all these different trends that I've presented to you, which of these look most likely to have an impact on your work? Wherever you are, whichever campus you are working in, or office, whatever profession you're in, how old you are, which of these is most likely to have the biggest impact? And if you want, I could hit rewind and go back and show you things. I'm a recovering English professor, so if you don't volunteer, I'll call on you. Yes, please.
I'm looking at all of this, and
Yes.
the question I say, what does a culture look like? What does the culture itself look like on a daily basis when all of these things become a reality? And how do we even think about education? How do we even think about a direction, in where a person goes with their education?
Yeah.
Because what you've done is you've exploded possibilities, and it's I'm having a little bit of a mind cramp going on here right now on this wonderful stuff. But I'm just looking at what does a culture look like that embraces all of this information?
That's a terrific question. Let me ask, who are you and where are you from?
I'm not telling.
Okay. We'll find out.
Everybody knows already, it's on their phone.
Close.
I'm from the U. I work as an instructional designer with the Academic Support Resources. My name is David.
Hi. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. It's a terrific question. Do you read science fiction?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if you don't read science fiction, you're not ready for the 21st century. David is. There's a fun novel from the early 1970s which says, all right, how about this? In the future, people will use computers connected to each other by phone lines. Bad programmers called hackers will write bad software called worms that will do bad things. You'll have virtual gambling and virtual schools. Well, not bad, right? So Werner Vinge wrote a fun novel called A Rainbow's End, which imagines a high school 20 years from now. And just assumes a lot of technology happening. It's interesting. If you haven't read it, it's an interesting book. He's a good writer. It's really interesting. And he points at a few things. One is interesting intergenerational clashes, as people have gaps between their technological fluencies, which is a key point. A second is interweaving a lot of geopolitics into everyday life. Now, he published this about 7 years ago, and we're already seeing that come true with things like, I don't know if you heard yesterday, Facebook announced that they pulled out 60 different accounts that were in some ways politically suspect, for the election, that kind of thing. So where you get your cat videos and where you learn about Aunt Muriel, you also may have, say, Russian geopolitical probes, right? So that's another way that the culture can change. And a third, and this is the thing I love the most, is creativity. That we keep, historically, whenever we invent something new, we make new stories with it. So if you think back to concept albums, they only existed because we had a long-playing record reliable enough that it could work. We do things with video, we did things with radio, we're doing it now with games. And so I think you'll see a culture that continues to generate new forms of art and stories, not necessarily all good, but we still keep making those. Those are a few quick ways. Answering your question, I think in many ways is the work of a lot of academics here, thinking about the next 15 years. Thank you for that great question. Yes, please.
Bryan, in year 2000 at the conference, the guy mentioned that you spoke in how in the 1960s healthcare was run by nuns, and then somebody figured out that education is profitable, and it was promising that we're going this path. And after his presentation, I went to him and I said, I hope that what he's talking about is and their line of learning in this stuff, how it happens, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, that's where we're heading. We're heading toward privatization of education. And it's very interesting for me that you were kind of very optimistic. You were saying how severe might die, we would go open access. But we have the laws, right?
Yep.
She does certain things. So I'm curious how you would talk about you mentioned Bernie Sanders that he wants to do ubiquitous access that might not be happening. So I'm interested about your thoughts. Also, you mentioned immersive learning, but I'm interested what you're going to do and what you're going to say about individualized learning.
About?
Individualized learning.
Well, I'll take the last part very quickly, because individualized learning seems to have almost total appeal right now. in part because it's a great term. It's hard to be. Could you all hear Plum's question? No. Okay, sorry. So the last part was asking about individualized learning, but the bigger part was asking about privatization of education. If I could summarize very, very quickly, that on the one hand, we seem to be privatizing education more and more. On the other hand, we have movements against that, like the open education movement, the desire to have free tuition, say in New York, for example, that kind of thing. Am I okay so far? So for individualized learning, we seem to be doing more and more of that. That brings us all to the data questions we had before about privacy and ownership, security, as well as the different things that we can do with it, which is pretty powerful. So in many ways, I see that just moving forward as a pretty obvious one to look at. In terms of privatization, generally speaking, we've been pretty fine with privatization. Most public universities are now largely private in terms of the revenue, where they get less and less income from their state. Rand Corporation just did a study of a bunch of Pennsylvania state colleges where they argue that they should either merge or become independent of the state completely because they only had 8% of their funding from the state. We're okay with that overall. There's not a lot of pushback against that. We seem to really accept that. The great scholar Chris Newfield has a wonderful book called The Great Mistake about defunding public education. And he says, well, what happened was we shifted from thinking public higher education as a public good to a private good. So you don't fund the University of Minnesota because it makes the citizenry better engaged and better educated. You fund it because it gives this guy a better job. You go, you support it because you might get a greater income level. So we've privatized that. Is this shifting? Is, say, the young congresswoman from Queens, is Ocasio-Cortez the sign of the future? Will we push back against that and have more open? It's possible. This is a struggle for us to be waging within education. So far, we're pretty lousy at it. We've been working hard to try and get state legislatures to pay us more money. We've failed miserably, except in South Dakota, because of oil money. We've been trying hard to push for open education resources. It's been growing very, very slowly. We've been trying hard to push for open access and scholarly publication, but it's also been growing very slowly. It may be that it just takes a couple more years and those flip and this becomes mainstream acceptance. It takes a lot of struggle. I'm glad you identified it. I mean, for me, I'm optimistic. I think we will head in that direction, but I think it will take time. It may take a generation to age out. One more question back there. Was that a hand or? But that'll teach you to ever scratch, right? Yes, please.
So you mentioned some of the challenges we have in higher ed with objectification and so on and so forth. Can you provide some examples or even some strategies for encouraging faculty to do more project-based learning, more types of innovation, more critical thinking? It doesn't have to be tech-based, but ideally.
I got in trouble at, I'm sorry, who are you and where are you from?
Oh, my name's Scott Spicer. I'm the media librarian for the University of Minnesota.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. How many?
I've been in maker spaces and doing this stuff all the time.
Yes.
But getting effective technology,
yes,
integration is always a difficult process, especially with objectification.
That's what I'm getting to. How many librarians are here? Ah, excellent. Good. Good. Yes, absolutely. I mean, Bob, you mentioned very, very briefly in your remarks, you mentioned the gap between access and internet speeds. I mean, in the United States, this digital divide is an enormous, enormous challenge. It's a huge problem. And the biggest hero in all of this is public libraries, who provide access to people without any fanfare. And they also train people in ludicrous ways. I mean, my son will walk in and go, hi, I want to shoot some 3D video. And then my friend Eric will walk in and say, that's a mouse, I think. Tell me what it does. And the library say, okay, we help both of you. I mean, libraries do fantastic work. Big library fan, I can't say enough. Adjuncts. I got in a lot of trouble at EDUCAUSE once by telling people, you shouldn't help tenured faculty anymore. They don't matter as much. You should focus on adjuncts. They're a clear majority. People freaked out. Oh my God! But in many ways, there was a wonderful study from Ithaca S&R about 5 years ago where they looked at innovation in faculty at a bunch of flagship state universities. They found that adjunct faculty were more likely to be innovative than tenured faculty. It's kind of a no-brainer in many ways. If your university says, do this thing with project-based learning, if you're a tenured professor of French, you could say, mais non, I don't have to do this. This doesn't work for me. If you're an adjunct faculty, you say, yes, sir, I'll do it right now because that's the market, right? So that's one possible way. Another thing, though, to think about is if our numbers are correct, if the changes and the anxieties we feel about higher education continue, if the demographics continue, if we don't manage to rebuild our international reputation further and further, then the competition among the universities and colleges is going to increase. We're going to have fewer and fewer students. We'll be fighting more and more brutally for them. And for faculty who wonder if they will be fired because we've been witnessing this across the country where tenured faculty are laid off. This just happened last week in LA at the Claremont Graduate School, which just closed its philosophy program, got rid of tenured faculty because they weren't having the numbers anymore. If you tell faculty, try project-based learning, for example, try makerspaces because you will better engage with students, the students will have better outcomes, they'll learn better, and you might make the campus more attractive, and you might be better off. Maybe I'm too cynical, maybe I'm thinking in terms of macro trends too much. That seems kind of persuasive to me. It's hard. We have all kinds of issues based on practice. Most faculty are not trained to teach, which is always just ridiculous, but still true. As a grad student in the 1990s, I took one class on teaching. It was pass-fail, optional. I was so excited by it. It was good. Me and the other student who took it were very happy. But the other thing is most faculty are, well, we could talk about the culture of this, but listening to the library and relying on the library, I think, is a crucial tool as well. I mean, don't have to tell you that. That clock says we're about 10 of, which means I've blown past the end of the session by 5 minutes. I think one person was going to come up and release you to the world. Isn't there some other person who's going to speak? That's you, and I'm in your way. I'm treading on your time. My apologies. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you. Please come up. Thank you.
Good morning.